All right, well, everyone, welcome to the January episode of the And One podcast. I'm Brian Kenny, and I'm joined by my co-host Kent Meehee, and we're here with Jason Nickleby. We're going to be talking about all things officiating, what it takes to be a complete official, and how to be on top of your game. And I can't think of a better person to bring on our show than Jason. Jason does a great job with being the coordinator of officials for the MSHSL, the Minnesota State High School League. He also officiates football in the Big Ten. So Jason brings a wealth of knowledge. He's always a great speaker. I had Jason at an officiating camp that I ran for high school football, and he spent a day with us in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. And the highlight of the camp from a lot of the campers was that Jason guy. And he just is a smooth talker, and he has great information and puts things in a way that people can take it back to where they are going to referee and put it to use. So we're excited to get some nuggets of information from Jason for all officials at any level. We could be talking about things that you could apply to youth basketball, high school basketball, college officiating, and we're excited to have him on our show for tonight. So thanks for joining us, Jason.
You bet. Thanks, Brian and Kent. Always a good opportunity to get out and talk about just what we all love, why we're all part of this is officiating and the connections that we make with people across the state, across the country. Just a lot of unique opportunities that we have when you're part of this great avocation. So happy to be on here to talk about all those kinds of things.
We can't talk about officiating basketball without talking about the Minnesota training tapes. I know you do training tapes for football. But that basketball season's going on right now. So your training tapes you've done them for a long time. They're so well done. You keep them as non-biased as possible. You give really good plays. Just kind of talk to us about the whole process of how that evolved and how that has impacted officials in Minnesota, because I know it impacts officials in Wisconsin. We use those a lot. So thanks for doing those. And
yeah, for sure. So I would say it kind of starts out from my philosophy just as an official, and then coming into a leadership position at the league, that I feel that we should put as many resources in the hands of officials as possible, and then they take what they like, leave what they don't like. And try to apply it to their game. And I've tried to put those training tapes and other resources in a positive frame of mind, like you mentioned. We all make mistakes as officials, so not really productive to be really negative about it. Just point out, yeah, we made a mistake here. Here's some things we could try to do differently, and give it a try next time. And knowing that I've made all the mistakes that are made on the training tapes, I've made all of those plus. So I've been in their shoes, officiated college basketball for 20 years, so made plenty of mistakes. And so just trying to give officials resources as they work on their craft, and working a million games a week. So I know that there's not a lot of time. So I try to make those tapes to the point, yet detailed enough that you'll be able to take something out of them. So put one out this morning, another one this morning, have all the plays cut up for another one to get out this week yet, and then try to have one out the following week, and have 8 or 9 probably for the season, which is typically what I've done with those. But I think Minnesota officials, and even officials across the country, because the MSHSL sends out my training tapes to every state association in the country, and not because they're super awesome or I'm really great at doing them, but I think it's just another resource for officials to try to improve their craft, because the theory is the better we get at it, the more training, the more education, the more resources, the more development. In theory, we're going to do a better job, which then in theory means we're going to get yelled at less, which then in theory means we're going to like it more and keep doing it. So with that in mind, that's why I've framed those training tapes the way that I have.
You know, they I think they are narrated really well. You have a voice that most people can just recognize. That's a Jason Nickleby training tape coming out of Minnesota. So Jason, could you maybe plug your YouTube channel? I don't know if it's complicated for our listeners, but maybe just share your YouTube channel real quick.
Yep, no problem. So for the longest time, put the training tapes out with a memo most weeks during the season, and then we would I would upload those to our YouTube channel, and it's MSHSL officials. So if they just go to YouTube and search MSHSL officials, every training tape that I've put together over the last 8 years that I've been at the league are all on there. Used to be optional for officials in Minnesota. It's beginning this year, we required those for state tournament consideration. So in football, we had 900 of our 1,300 football officials that watched all 8 tapes. So far in basketball, the 4 that have gone out through today, we've had 560 that have watched all of those to this point. They don't have to watch them all until January 24th. So they do have a little bit of time to watch those. But in addition, we put them on the YouTube channel so that officials in Wisconsin or North and South Dakota or anywhere, if they want them, they can have them. And I'm not charging anybody for them. They're not that good. I'm just putting them out there on our YouTube channel so that if people want more resources, they're there. So just go to YouTube, search MSHSL officials, and all the training tapes we've done over 8 years are on there. So
I've seen that grown quite a bit too, and I know our association has taken advantage of just breaking down video and watching video, is using that resource to get better. So like Jason, I feel like when people first start watching film, they look at, did I get the call right or did I not? And they focus so much on the call itself. But as you know, from creating all those films, there's so much more to breaking down a play or looking at a situation on film and talking about the different aspects of it. So can you kind of touch on that? There is the call that's made or something that happens, but how many different aspects do you look at when you create your clips, and something that officials can also look at with their own video?
For sure. So I come from an educational trajectory background, having been a teacher for 10 years before I went to the league, and I'm always trying to make the training tapes the most educational piece that I can make it. And the big part of that is, as you mentioned, is determining what kind of plays will be the most beneficial to the person that's watching it. And most of the time, 95% of the time, I would tell you, the major aspects of the training tape that I try to focus on, I think, are the key pieces when you're breaking down film, is our mechanics and our positioning. Because if we're lacking in those 2 areas, then we're going to struggle to make proper judgment calls if we're not in the right place or looking at the right thing. And I think that's the most critical aspect of breaking down film is, okay, we have a block charge. What I would look at last is whether it truly was a block or a charge. I'm going to look at where where was I standing? What are my shoulders doing? I can tell a lot by looking at officials, more so in football because they have a hat on, but even in basketball, I have a pretty good idea of where they're looking, and knowing as that play develops where they should be looking. And so I think it's critical to look at our positioning. Are we too close to the floor? Can we be deeper? Are we too high as a trail, or more specifically as a center? I would tell you we're way too high, as trails and as centers. And I think the main reason is we are worried about getting beat back in transition. Well, I got news for everybody who's listening. The kids are 18. We're not. We're going to get beat back. It's just a fact. So let's officiate the high percentage of plays, which is 90% of the plays are going to be right there in the front court within the 28-foot mark all the way to the end line. So why are we standing close to half court? Because we're worried about a 10% play. Let's worry about a 90% play and try to get those right. And if we miss the 10% plays, so be it. So you got to play the odds there. But I think that's the critical aspect I'm looking at when I'm breaking down these films to find clips for these training tapes is what's a good example of positioning, or what's a play where, you know what, I think if we would have adjusted our position here or stayed put, sometimes it's not even adjusting position. We're adjusting for no reason. Just stay put and officiate the play. You're probably going to be better off if you're just stationary and just stay there versus, shifting out. We get into a hurry to get, to trail, for example. So I'm a center and the lead rotates. We get this set mindset that, oh, I'm the new trail. I gotta bail out and become the trail. No, what's the hurry? Officiate the matchup. Once that matchup goes away, now you can just slowly transition out to trail. And if we're working at the 28-foot mark or so, there really isn't all that far to go. And so really not a hurry to get there. So I try to point that out, yet when I pick out plays, I'm really looking at, this is a really good example of what we want: positioning, mechanics, philosophy. And I would tell you if those three things are in place, mechanics, positioning, philosophy, the vast majority of the time, the call is also correct, or the no call is also correct. It's when we kind of slip up in where we're looking, where we're standing, how we move, and then philosophy, and that incorporates rules knowledge too as well. If you're in the perfect spot and positioning wise and mechanics, yet you don't understand how verticality works and offensive initiated contact, then you're not going to make correct judgments in that case as much as you would if you have your philosophies down. And that takes experience. Now, the good thing is in basketball, to get experience, you can work 10 games in 2 days if you really want, and you can get a lot more experience. We don't have that same avenue on the football side of things, but in basketball, you always have the opportunity to get more experience and try to shore up that philosophy piece so it matches your positioning and mechanics. And if you have all those things together, I think you're going to make really strong judgment calls the vast majority of the time, in my opinion.
Which is awesome too, because you can see all of that stuff on video, which is a really another advocate for how important that is. Do you see any other trends? Like, I know you mentioned you think like as the center, we maybe play too high. If you can think of any, maybe like one more or two more things that, like, as you've made these videos, you see these trends that officials do that maybe they should be doing something else.
Yeah, I would say, our hustle is not lacking. So I really like that. But I think sometimes in trying to hustle to get back or get to a spot, I think we end ourselves over hustling ourselves out of position. So for example, getting back to playing the percentages, we're going to get beat back a very high percentage of the time. These kids are bigger, faster, stronger all the time. And so what I've been trying to suggest to officials, something to consider, is if you're going back in transition and you can't get to the end line to take that play in a stationary position, my recommendation is stop at the free throw line and officiate it from there. We officiate that play all day long from the center position. So why can't we take a transition play at the basket from the center position? I think we can. We do it the whole game. So that's and then adjust once the play, if they make the basket, fine, just slide down to the end line. If they don't, then just kind of read the play. If we're coming back, then you can just stay put. If it's going to stay in the front court, you can kind of slide down. So what I found is in video and trying to hustle to get back, they are even up with the ball handler. And I think that puts us in a position of being straight line and doesn't give us the best look on plays at the basket and transition, especially for us in Minnesota as it relates to having to officiate the restricted area. I think when we're moving in unison with the ball handler, I don't think it gives us the best vantage point to officiate those kind of plays. The other piece, and we've all been there, and this is an ongoing thing for basketball and has been for 100 years, is, and this gets back to being too high, but when we're looking through rear ends and elbows, we're not in the right place. We've all been there. We're standing there going, you know what? I'm not in the right spot. I really should move. And here's when it happens. They dish the ball over to the player right in front of you. And like clockwork, like 99 times out of 100, they fire up the three. And you're like, I'm in horrible position. I can't see. So adjusting, what we've tried to suggest to officials is work beneath the matchup. So what we mean by that is take a step or two down towards the end line. So now you can see space instead of looking through the shooter's rear end. Much better to see space, figure out, is there contact? If so, does it rise to the level of a foul? Thirdly, who's responsible for that contact? Is it offense initiated? Is it defensive illegal contact? Which is it? And taking shooters all the way to the floor, I think we're in a much better position to do that when we work beneath the matchup. The other reason that we suggest to work beneath the matchup is if you decide to go on the high side of the matchup, yeah, you're going to see space and you're going to see all those same things. The only problem is if they block the shot or deflect it or, those kinds of things, and now it's coming back up the floor, you're right in the soup because it's coming right at you. So we recommend that officials work beneath the matchup because it doesn't put you in that position if we end up going the other direction. The only thing I would mention with that is if you're the trail and you take 2 steps down and work beneath the matchup, all fine. But if you're the center across, you have to pick up on that, because if it does get blocked, guess what? Trail has no chance. You're going to have to get back and become the new lead. That's how it's going to have to be. And then the current lead is going to have to figure that out, and it's going to have to come up and fill on that other side, so we don't end up with 2 people on the same side of the court. So that takes a little bit of getting used to and experience with it. But I think people would find if they worked beneath the matchup to see space, see the shooter up, see the shooter down, I think they'd find much better call accuracy as it relates to shooter related contact, because I would tell you that the contact right here on the elbow or even on the wrist is one of the hardest calls we have. You know, when they cross body block somebody, anybody can call that. But when we get just the grazing of the elbow, if you're standing behind them looking through their back, you have no chance at that play. And our call accuracy drops dramatically. So those are kind of the key pieces that I've seen in evaluation of film, is just adjusting your position so that you can see space, so you can see who's responsible for contact. And you're just going to be, and then if you apply the philosophy and the rules, verticality, legal guarding position, we're going to be in much better shape call accuracy wise, from what I've seen in video review.
You know, it's interesting, just listening to you, Jason, we just got a memo not too long ago in women's college basketball about refereeing the shooter, especially on 3-pointers in the corner, protecting the shooter as they go up all the way to their return to the floor, and not letting the defenders make illegal contact with them while they're still on their way back down. And I think sometimes what happens is officials will watch the flight of the ball as the shooter releases it because they're protecting their the shot motion, but then they don't come back to ground zero fast enough to be able to watch if the shooter is being boxed out too early. And then they go down, and that's kind of matches up with your philosophy about the inside out perspective. You got to protect the shooter all the way down to the floor, and rebounding will be second, but the primary thing is that shooter. And there's criticism coming in every direction right now about a lot of things in officiating. We hear people say things like, you got to have thick skin. You're doing a job where people are paying admission and they get to yell at you. And where are we at with, from your perspective, as a state level leader in Minnesota, with everyone being better? Because we've been talking about this a lot in Wisconsin, that spectators have to be better, athletic directors and game managers be better, coaches be better, and officials, we have to be better too. So collectively, how does that work from your 10,000 foot view?
Yeah, it's a constant conversation that we have at state association offices across the country, and it's not just basketball; it's every sport, of course. But the main thing I would share with officials is take care of business. Use the tools that you have available to you in the rules book and the mechanics manuals and so forth to address behaviors. And we don't give book warnings, not even close to the number of times that we should be doing that. Nothing frustrates me more as an administrator now. Nothing frustrates me more than when I get a report from an official that says this coach or this fan or whatever, their behavior was over the top. It was ridiculous. It was this, it was that. Yet at the end of the report, the official did absolutely nothing about it. Now, I'm a very staunch supporter of officials, probably much to the annoyment, if that's a word, of my colleagues. They know that I'm going to support officials 100% of the time, but it is very challenging for me to go to an AD and say, hey, your coach's behavior is not where it needs to be, your spectators or your players or whatever happens to be, and then but there was no penalty. Now, I would tell you the ADs, vast majority of the time, are pretty good about addressing that when I ask them to. But if an AD told me or responded to me when something like that comes up, says, well, how bad could it be they didn't get a technical? And what do I say to that? So what I need officials to do is I need them to take care of business. Now, does that mean come in with the 6 shooters, half cocked, looking for tees and looking for warnings and looking for that? No, but we've officiated long enough to know that when that stuff's going to occur, it will find you, and then use the tools you have. And what that starts with is, trying to establish and build a rapport with the coach. Okay. Coaches are under a lot of pressure. I understand. I mean, I come from a family of coaches. Parents were over the top. And that was when my wife was a coach, when my father-in-law was a coach, my dad was a coach. The parents were over the top, and they're still over the top. So coaches are under a lot of pressure. So we have to understand at least a little bit on that. However, just because they're under pressure does not mean that it's free game to do whatever you want and say whatever you want to officials. So officials, try to build some rapport. Coach, I understand. Coach, I get it. Coach, tell me what you saw. Tell me what you had there, and then give them a chance to vent a little bit, and then, okay, I got you. I understand. I'll watch for that. I'll look for that. Or coach, you know what? I didn't see it that way, but if that's the way it happened, then I missed it. It's okay to admit to a mistake. Now, don't admit 47 mistakes in a game. That's probably not recommended, but I would tell you it's okay to admit a mistake, every once in a while. But when they make it personal, or just won't let it go, now it's time to say, coach, we need to move on from that. We're going to move on with the game here. And I need you to do that for me. I need you to move on with the game. And then if they can't, that's the perfect opportunity. Bench warning on the coach from Sun Prairie. And they mark it in the book. And now when we move on with the rest of the game, if they have more behaviors that rise to the level of unacceptable, that's not a warning. That's a technical foul. And I say that, with it in mind that I was one of the worst offenders working basketball. I allowed coaches to say and do all sorts of things. It took me till my 20th year before I said, working with them is one thing, taking abuse is another. And when it gets personal, that needs to be addressed. And those aren't warnings either. When they say, you are insert your 4-letter word, that's not a warning. That's a technical foul. And then if they do it again, that's another technical foul, and send them packing. And I would tell you, the vast majority of the time, at least in Minnesota, our ADs, our superintendents, our principals don't have a lot of tolerance for that kind of behavior on the sideline. At the same time, hard for them to address it if we don't take care of business and address it the way that we should. So that's my biggest piece, is officials have the tools to address these kinds of things. And when we don't, first of all, it doesn't help you in that game. I would tell you it affects your concentration to the point that you're not an effective official when you're too busy refereeing the bench. So take care of that for yourself. Secondly, if you're a veteran official like you guys are, I would tell you it does our rookie and newer officials no favors. I mean, I remember a conversation with a coach at the college level, but it would apply at the high school level. You know, after 20 years of taking all this abuse, I finally said, I'm not taking that. And I'm not going to allow that. And I gave him a technical when he made a personal comment about me. And he kind of stopped and kind of gave me the hands out, you know, gesture. And I said, you know, don't give me that. I haven't called a technical in this league since George Bush's first term. So, you know, I would tell you, you earned it. Second of all, shame on me that it took that long, you know, but I said, third of all, if I've been in this league for 20 years and you treat me that way, how do you treat the new guys? And we're trying to hang on to those people. And I've told many of our administrators, you know, if you think the officiating is bad now, which I don't, by the way, I don't think it's bad, but if they think it's bad now, just wait. When you run out all these veteran people or even the newbies, they're not being replaced by Division I or NBA officials. They're being replaced by brand new officials in their own right who are going to have their own struggles. And so as veteran officials, and that was in our memo I sent out to the Minnesota people today, I need Minnesota officials, veterans across the country, doesn't matter where, I need them to take care of business. You know, use the tools you have. Coach, I get it. Coach, I'll watch for that. But eventually when it's affecting your officiating, it's coach, that's enough. And then if they can't handle that, warning in the book, technical, because when I have a conversation with that coach, which I rarely do, but if I did, I'd go, you had 3 verbal warnings, a written warning, and 2 technicals. Goodbye. Click. There's nothing to talk about. They got 6 warnings before they got tossed. So take care of business, officials. If we're having poor experiences in games, and this is coming from somebody who wasn't very good at it for a long time, I would tell you, if we're having poor experiences in games, it's on us because we have the ability and the tools to address that and not allow that to continue. So,
you know, going along with this, Jason, one of the things that we took a big lead on in our association, we collaborated with another group in Wisconsin called the Arrowhead Officials Associations in Northwest Wisconsin, and we made a sportsmanship video, and I think I shared that video with you. What did you think overall? Now that we've done the legwork and we have this, you know, sportsmanship video, which has the right people in the video. It has, you know, athletic administrators, officials, coaches, and it's a united front about, you know, being better and using the quote, you know, what we permit, we promote. What do you think about that? Are we fighting some of the same, you know, monsters?
For sure. But I've tried to tell prospective officials that if you're going to get into officiating, high school sports is the place to do it. You know, this is education-based athletics and activities. It truly is supposed to be an extension of the classroom. And again, the vast majority of our ADs, principals, and superintendents are very supportive of the work that officials do. And so I think seeing on the other side of it from coaches, from ADs, administrators about how important it is to set a good example, I think is more beneficial on affecting their fellow coaches and their fellow administrators than it is affecting officials one way or another, is my feeling. So I think a video like what you did, which is really well done, by the way, I think has a greater effect on their fellow administrators and their fellow coaches than it does on officials. Officials are affected by their peers. Coaches and ADs, principals are also affected by their peers. And so what we try to do in Minnesota is focus on the positive aspects, with the hope that positive peer pressure will encourage other schools to do the same. So when we get positive reports, which I've received more positive reports this year than I have in the previous 8 years, I think when we get those out, we try to get those out on Twitter and get it out on our webpage and try to really promote it so that other schools see that, you know what, there are positive things going on out there in the high school officiating and activities athletics world. And other schools, you should do it too, because it's the right thing to do. And the schools really like to be recognized. Despite what officials may think, the schools get negative feedback just like we do. They don't hear when they do a nice job. And so they really like to get that feedback from officials about how great of an experience it was to be there. And officials go where they're wanted or where they're valued. And so if you know, I mean, we had a story about an AD who was a longtime basketball coach, and his son is actually a college basketball coach now. His school is not exactly on the beaten path, but officials would go out of their way to go to his school because at halftime, he would turn the water on in the showers because he knew it was cold, but he knew it'd be warm by the end of the game. And people may think that that's silly or trivial, but officials saw that as someone who was committed to having a good experience for them, just by something as simple as turning on the showers at halftime. Officials, we're pretty simple creatures. You know, we don't need, you know, big time bucks, as nice as that would be, but, or, you know, or things, you know, we just like to be valued and wanted for what we do. And we're going to keep going to those places. So that's kind of the message to schools, that if you can demonstrate that value and that positivity towards officials, the good officials are going to want to go there and keep going there. You know, so I encourage coaches and ADs, superintendents, principals, take a step back and kind of evaluate your program as a whole and say, do people want to come here? And if you're not sure about that, or your answer no, you know, then we need to reevaluate what we're doing. And another thing that we've done along those lines is we've told coaches, go ask your players, would they ref for you? Would they officiate for you? If their answer is no, or hell no, we really need to reevaluate what we're doing and how we're behaving. And, you know, they need to understand that not one official in the history of organized sporting activities has ever said to a coach who screams at them, you know what, you're absolutely right, I'm changing my call. So
reverse travel.
Yeah. So it's not effective. We just need to have a working relationship, knowing that we're both under some kind of pressure, you know, to be the best that we can be. And let's just work together to provide what should be the goal for all of us, is to provide the best experience for kids. That's what we should be about.
It's interesting too, Jason, just like the whole perspective of taking a step back in that situation. You know, it's like, well, you know, these refs aren't good. It's like, well, this coach is nasty and he yells and this, and everybody's so focused on pointing out, like you said, like the negative of it. But if you just take a step back and just reflect on, am I providing a good, positive atmosphere? And when you put people on the spot about that, they can't get defensive, you know, and they're forced to take a step back. So though that reflection piece is just so important on every level. And I really appreciated too, you know, using the tools when coaches are rough, because like Brian said, there's a lot of young blood that's kind of almost getting thrown to the wolves. We say, you know, it's tough, and, you know, here you go. And some people are stepping into varsity games earlier than maybe they would have liked, but just the fact that, you know, we're providing them with those tools so they're not feeling like they're being thrown to the wolves. So hopefully, if we have some newer officials listening to this, they can take that and be a little more prepared. But I think we've got just a few more questions, Jason, to kind of wrap up tonight's episode. And I hate when Brian says we want to limit it to 30 minutes because I feel like we could go on for a couple hours.
We could.
Yeah, I know. And this next one or topic that we'll kind of focus on it is a perspective piece, but it's maybe a little less on officiating. But here in Wisconsin, recently they've put out some surveys to coaches about adding a shot clock. And I know Minnesota doesn't have a shot clock, but you guys have a restricted arc. And, coaches and ADs have talked about the what ifs that it might cause or the struggles that we might face if we add more things like a shot clock or an arc. But can you talk to that about, and you obviously, Minnesota has the arc and you've reffed plenty of games with a shot clock. So in terms of high school basketball, what impact has that had? Because us here in Wisconsin don't have either. And I think a lot of people are just interested, your perspective on how that's influenced the high school game.
For sure. So I would tell you next year we will have a shot clock in place for every game. So we're going to have both next year. But this is I want to say our 5th year using the restricted arc. And so now we've gotten to the point that pretty well established part of our game. And I think based on my observations, especially watching our state tournament film, not even close to the number of major collisions in the paint now that we used to have. Because the way NFHS rules are written relative to establishing legal guarding position incentivizes those kind of crashes under the basket, because there's no restriction outside of being out of bounds. There's no restriction on where you can establish legal guarding position. And so what we had for quite a long time in Minnesota, and I'm sure this is true in other parts of the country, is officials would kind of make up their own arc rule. So even if the guy, or gal was set up under the basket for the last 10 minutes, if they got run over, they got called for a block because officials have said, you know what, you're not setting up shop there. I'm putting it on you, even though the rules did not support that. And
coaches probably say that too.
Yeah, right? I mean, yeah.
Well, I've heard it several times this year. He can't do that.
And my answer to coaches is, the NFHS rule says they can establish legal guarding position anywhere on the floor, provided they do it legally. So I think when we got the arc in play, I think it just obviously it naturally got rid of that kind of mentality, that philosophy, which wasn't supported by rule. So players and coaches adjusted really quickly. It's really very simple. You can't be a secondary defender that's grounded in the restricted area for the purpose of taking a charge. That's it. That's all we're talking about. If they jump, it's like the arc isn't even there. Now it's straight up verticality rules and principles. If they don't establish legal guardian position, it's also like the arc isn't there. It's just a regular old blocking foul. And so I think, I've tried to really not dumb it down, but just really kind of put it in a framework that everybody can understand. I said, look for a player that wasn't guarding them originally, who tries to take a charge while grounded in the arc. That's all we're talking about, and if you look at it from that perspective, I would say the vast majority of the time, you're going to make the correct decision. Now, there's nuances, like We don't have secondary defenders when the player stops making progress towards the basket. We don't have secondary defenders when it's straight off an offensive rebound. We do have secondary defenders in odd person breaks. We have secondary defenders when a help defender comes over and establishes legal guardian position in the arc, and then they turn and make contact with them. But I think players and coaches have really adjusted well to the point of, if they get run over and they get called for a restricted area blocking foul, 9 times out of 10, their buddy comes up to him and says, "You can't be there. What are you doing? Yeah, why didn't you jump?" So they're just way better at either jumping, contesting a shot, or kind of doing the bullfighter ole, and let them go right to the basket, instead of the old days. And by old days, I mean 6 years ago, they don't set up shop anymore to try to take charges. And I've tried to convey to the MSHSL that I believe the restricted arc is a really good rule from a safety perspective. And if we're trying to eliminate crashes and injuries on those kinds of plays, then why we shouldn't incentivize. Because if I'm an offensive player, I'm going to put my head down and go right to the basket and run people over until officials call me for offensive fouls. And I think they don't do that anymore because defenders get out in front of them, establish legal guardian position, or they just rise vertically and try to block a shot. It's really improved playing legal defense in my estimation from what I've seen. Now, from an officiating standpoint, it's going to be interesting to me, high school official, the adjustment of having both a shot clock to manage and a restricted arc to manage. I would say I try to tell them, especially in 2-person, that's going to be really that's going to be a challenge. But what I would tell officials is, don't worry so much about the restricted area. Restricted area plays happen, once every couple of games. Sometimes not for longer than that. Where shot clock, you're going to be dealing with quite a bit more during a game. So I would tell officials, don't worry about restricted arc plays. If you have a grounded defender in the arc and you're not sure, assume they were grounded, and that's where they established legal guardian position, and hit them with a restricted area blocking foul. And hopefully they won't do that anymore. So I think it's gone really well in Minnesota, and I think coaches and players have adjusted really well, and officials get better and better at it all the time.
Yeah, maybe it'll evolve, in Wisconsin. I have a funny story, Jason, that I have to share with you. This is a couple of years now, but every year I hire the officials at Just a Game Fieldhouse for all the varsity games, and there's always teams from Minnesota coming to play. And I won't mention the team, but they were playing against the Wisconsin team, and during warmups there was a dunk. I mean, it was a dunk where the rim was moving. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just a throw the ball down.
A light tap.
Yeah, it wasn't a stuff. It was a dunk. And officials were questioning whether or not to tech the player for dunking during warmups and penalize it accordingly. And they called me over, and I was actually there watching the game. And the head coach says, "We don't have that rule in Minnesota." So I said, "Coach, I'm going to call 3 different people, and I'm going to verify that." And they're on speed dial: MJ, Jared, and Marshall. "Okay, never mind." he changed his mind. He changed his mind so fast.
Yeah,
said, "I'm sorry."
Yeah, don't bluff unless you're prepared for it to be called upon.
It was priceless. He went from thinking he was going to get away with that to, oh shoot.
Well, you gave him the 3 kings
3 name drops
of southeastern Minnesota. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've given us some Really good information. My gears are turning. A lot of thinking. You always have the ability to do that, Jason. I still use some of your language that you gave us about defensive pass interference, and the hoppers and the criteria, and it's all great stuff. And what's something that is a favorite quote? Like, I have mine. You heard me say it earlier. What we permit, we promote. Kent, what's yours? Do you have one?
I mean, that one is a good one. I guess I'll have to think about it. I'll tell you when Jason gives his. I'll have to think
Jason,
about mine for a second.
We're putting you on the
We'll
spot.
put him on the spot first, and then then I'll go.
For a favorite quote and something that you could relate back to your role in Minnesota at the high school league and as an official. I mean, you're doing some, pretty big time football. So, you got to have some kind of quote on your radar here.
Well, one I use in football a little bit more, but I've used it in basketball, when they want to foul, or they think they're being grabbed or whatever. I usually tell them, well, they can't stop you. You're an All-American. And when they hear that, they have one of two tracks. Either they agree that they're an All-American and they can't be stopped, and so what's a little foul? Or they're going to not agree that they're All-American and they're saying that they're not a very good player. So they really have no place to go but to say, you know what? Yeah, I'm a good enough player to play through that. And so that kind of catches them off guard and kind of gets the, sense of humor going. Kind of a similar thing I had, there was a kid in Minnesota who won Mr. Football in Minnesota, and then he went on to play Division III men's basketball. And he was a freshman and he was starting on a pretty good team. And he got bumped into and went to the ground. It wasn't a foul, at least not in my opinion. And he kind of looked up at me and kind of gave me the, where's the foul treatment. And I took my whistle out and I leaned over him and I said, Mr. Football called, they want their award back. And he laughed and then he got up and, that was kind of the start of a pretty good relationship with him. But I think we have the opportunity to use, within reason and whatnot, some sense of humor, and understand that it's an emotional game and there's going to be emotional reactions. And we don't need to look to penalize emotion all the time. We can find ways to work with them and get them back down, knowing they're going to have an emotional outburst, and then we're going to play. But that telling them, hey, they can't stop you. You're All-American. That's worked for me pretty well, both in football and basketball, to kind of get them distracted. And they have to think about how they're going to answer that one. So
nice. Okay, Kent. We gave you plenty of time.
Oh, I know. And I thought of it right as Jason was talking, but mine's not necessarily a quote that I would say to a player or anything, but one of my favorite sayings that, like Jason has touched on it too, this is all about education-based stuff. And I'm also a teacher and a coach here in Wisconsin, Jason. So one of my favorite quotes is, success is a product of your culture. And I think tonight's podcast is a really good example of that. We've been able to talk, like through this podcast, we've been able to talk to a lot of good people and people that know their stuff and have some great perspectives. And I think with whether it's your first day of officiating or you've been doing it for, 20 or 30 years, if you surround yourself with good people and people that are positive and want what's best for not only you, but for the cause that you're fighting for, you're going to come out on top of a lot of different scenarios, whether that's, and you can apply it to anything. if you surround yourself in teaching with a positive atmosphere and good coworkers, like you're going to have a good day at school. If you're a coach and you surround yourself with good assistants and you have fun, your team is going to enjoy success. And then it comes back to officiating. If you surround yourself with people who know what they're talking about, but also want to see you grow and, have success in the officiating world, like you're going to have so much success and enjoy what you're doing. And then you're going to pass that on to other people too. So that's kind of one that I always come back to. And I've been lucky, and Brian, we've been lucky to have, Jason and other people on this podcast, and what we've been talking about tonight gets spread to everybody else. And I'm really excited for this episode to get shared tomorrow. And I'm going to listen to this again because hopefully it's been great.
Hopefully, Jason, you can, maybe share our YouTube link from this podcast with officials in Minnesota. And we're doing something pretty cool. February 15th, we're doing a webinar with Paul Diaspora from Crown Refs. I don't know if you've.
Yeah, I keep getting his emails.
Yeah, he's got some really good insight on rapid response techniques that officials can use. Like you talked about, the toolbox. Well, if your toolbox only has one tool in it, it's really not a toolbox. It's got to have more than one tool to be a toolbox. I mean, you got to have an arsenal of things in there, and so we're super excited about that. And this podcast has been great. And I sat and pondered some things about what schools could do, because everybody has budget constraints, and you're strapped for being able to buy Jimmy John's for referees or Subway. But I mean, I found some things that are free, and this is just my list, and this will kind of wrap things up. But set up orange cones for the officials near the door that they're going to enter, and officials, every time you go to the mall or you go to the grocery store, if you see a spot in the front row, everyone gets excited about that spot. Like, I'm going to get that spot because I'm close to the door. Well, officials would love that. So it's not that expensive to have rock star parking for the football crew or for the 3 officials that are driving in separate cars. Put 3 cones out, and the officials can move the cones and park their car, and they're right by the door. And I worked a college basketball game, and I had a water girl. Each of us had two water girls and a water boy. And I was so hydrated during that game, and I also had to pee a lot too. And it was so cool to have somebody cater to me. During the game, even if it was just something so simple as getting me a glass of water or Gatorade. And it teaches kids servant leadership, because they feel good because they're, having. And I had so many conversations with my water girl. I knew she was a youth basketball player. I knew where she went to school. I knew she liked horses. So we were talking during just about every, and you got 4 media timeouts. So I was chatting up with her the whole game. And I gave her a Culver's ice cream coupon at halftime. I felt so good about our connection. And her 2 friends are like, "Where's mine?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'll go outside and get 2 more at the end."
Your partners aren't going to get any water.
Yeah. Just like thank you notes. Have your leadership class take the time to write thank you notes, handwritten ones, to the referees, and put them in the locker room, next to their check or next to the towel or whatever else goes in there. And they're going to want to come back to that spot. UW Platteville gets us Jimmy John's. I love it. I've been there 4 times this year, and I think I go back there one more time. And I know I'm going to get an email from their administrative assistant, Heather, on I go there Wednesday. I'll get an email tomorrow. What do you want at Jimmy John's? Number 17 with cheese. Boom.
Yep. That is nice about going there. Now, for me, I didn't love the Jimmy John's that much to want to go to Platteville from where I'm at, but
well, that's kind of far.
But it's still, it's still just
kindness.
It gets back to what I mentioned before, that officials like to go where they're wanted and valued, and it has nothing to do with with getting things. It's just that feeling that they know that they want you to be there and they value what you do. And as I've told the schools a number of times, it costs you absolutely nothing to say thank you to the officials, especially our underclass people. It's really a critical piece. The grizzled veterans, maybe it doesn't bother them as much if they don't get told thank you, but it's good for the new people. And those are really good ideas. The parking piece, especially, again, I said this earlier too, we're very simple creatures, us officials. We don't need anything major, but it's not lost on us when schools make an effort to do those kinds of things. And if you want good officials to keep coming back to your place, that's a very good way to do that, in my estimation.
Well, this was great, and I know I've had a good time, and I know Kent has as well. And thanks so much, Jason, for your time on a Sunday night. And you got a family of 4 to get back to, and I'm sure most of them are probably sleeping.
No school tomorrow.
Oh, that's right. No school for some people tomorrow,
most
right?
of them,
Martin Luther King Day. Yeah.
Right. So, although one of them's passed out cold on the couch right now, she's really tired. So,
well, thanks so much, and we'll connect with you again, I'm sure, somewhere down the road. So, thanks, Jason.
Yep. Anytime. Happy to help you, Brian, Kent, and stay in touch.